Welcome to the Fanboy and the Hater,
a podcast hosted and produced by Mike Hall
and Jim Harris, where we discuss the best
and worst
in movies,
TV,
and pop culture.
So first off, let's talk a little bit about what we mean and what we don't mean by hater.
This is Jim, the co-host who most often plays the role of hater on this podcast. I wanted to point out that there's a big difference between being a hater and being a dick. And it largely comes down to the difference between hating on something versus hating on someone. If you're hating on something about movies, TV, or pop culture because you dislike it, or as more often the case with me, you simply wish it had been done better, then you're a hater, and that's okay. However, if you're hating on someone because of an opinion that they expressed about movies, TV, or pop culture that you disagree with, or they shared a negative review of a movie or TV show that you love, especially if your response turns into a personal attack or bullying on the basis of something like race, ethnicity, nationality, sexual orientation, or gender identity, then you're not a hater. You're just a dick. Bottom line, it's okay to be a hater. Don't be a dick.
So say we all! So say we all!
So we thought for our first episode, when we talk about our origin story, we would talk about our origins. What gave us our opinions? Who do we connect with in pop culture as we go forward?
Well, the second one on my list is actually Peter Parker. Yes, he does become Spider-Man. Spider-Man was pretty much my only comic book attraction as a kid, and also the cartoon series that I started to watch. Even though Batman and Superman were around, I remember Adam West and Burt Ward as the Batman and Robin show, which was before I was born, but still reruns were on TV. I remember the old 1950s Superman show that was in reruns. I also remember the Christopher Reeves Superman movies. But the superhero that really connected with most with me was Peter Parker, because he was a nerdy kid who loved science and got bullied a lot until he got bitten by a radioactive spider and got turned into a superhero. So it was about the only comic book that I somewhat collected on a regular basis. I wasn't a huge comic book kid, but I did collect a small number of Spider-Man comics, and it was one of my favorite cartoon series. And then I also, as I got older in the 80s, Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, which was an X-Men crossover with Iceman and Firestar, which got me into a slightly wider world, which also included the X-Men. But nowadays, the great era of superhero movies and comic book heroes coming to film and TV, it all traces back to me to Peter Parker and Spider-Man, which is why if you ever ask me what my favorite superhero movies are, they're often going to include, at the top of that list, Spider-Man, because for me, that's how I got into comics and superheroes.
Well, that's a good segue into my next one. As I grew up and, became nerdy, I started getting into comic books. And as a lot of people into comic books in the late 80s, early 90s, I really connected with Wolverine. I think most people, they really connected with Wolverine because of his attitude. They really liked the claws and the indestructibleness and everything. I connected with Wolverine because I was also a short guy with anger management issues. Wolverine, through the stories that I read, he kind of taught me, you read between the lines, you can see that you can be really tough while still being short, and you can also control your anger. He really taught me how to not blow up over little things that don't really matter. It took me a long time to figure that out, but reading between the lines and reading Wolverine's stories, you can see how little things really aggravated him, but he didn't do anything about it. He just kind of let it slide off, and, he would just go blow off some steam somewhere else rather than blowing up on the person doing it. And that really affected me, again, being a short guy with anger management issues.
It's funny, the first time I think I ever saw Wolverine was actually in a Spider-Man cartoon, which also reminded me of one of the reasons I liked Spider-Man was because he often would react to angry, aggressive characters with humor first. And actually, that was one of the other things I loved about Peter Parker and Spider-Man was that sense of humor and that quippy type action. So there was actually, I don't even remember the context of it, but for some reason, Wolverine wanted to fight Spider-Man, and Spider-Man was more interested in joking with Wolverine.
Well, in the books, they actually have that dynamic. They're friends that kind of hate each other. And it's really funny. I love their dynamic together in the books. Again, my era was the X-Men animated series. I loved that series.
That was a great series. My introduction to the X-Men was through Spider-Man, and it was in Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, and it was interesting because Spider-Man, because he was friends with Iceman and Firestar, would go help out the X-Men, but Professor X had to keep telling Spider-Man, it's like, you can't be an X-Man because you're not a mutant.
Yeah.
So initially, I didn't like the X-Men because they wouldn't let Spider-Man in their club.
You know, that's actually almost funny. If you're familiar with the X-Men and why they came up with the X-Men, the fact that he was excluded. But they did allow him to go with them on missions and stuff like that. It's not like they were saying, no, you can't be part of us because you're different. It was they were saying this is only for this group of people that are being shunned. You're not being shunned for being a mutant. Therefore, you can't really be part of this, but we're still willing to work with you. Pop culture shaped my life so much. I don't really talk about it. I've maybe 2 or 3 people have ever said anything about this too. But I've often throughout my life struggled very deeply with like depression and anxiety. And having pop culture as a way to escape real life and go to another world where anything is possible, be video games, comic books, movies, music, anything like that, is a way that I can just move to another realm where real life issues do not exist anymore. It helps me escape and then come back refreshed. So it has really helped me with that.
I also have at various times throughout my life, and to a certain extent also currently, struggle with depression as well. Many times throughout my life, I did not have many friends, and my television was an escape, like you said, whether it would be to a galaxy far, far away, or it would be to some bizarre comedy or something funny like the A-Team, or something, again, imaginative like animation and something like that. It definitely was a welcome break from the real world, and it definitely helped me get through some difficult times. Pop culture in general, and a lot of the shows that we end up talking about on this podcast, have played an important role in our lives, and we do appreciate that.
I also did not have a lot of friends growing up, and I escaped into TV quite often. I would hyper-focus into the TV. But really, for me, I didn't have a lot of friends simply because I didn't care or want them. I've always been more of a loner. I've always liked to stay alone. I know people kind of make fun of me because I don't leave my house. As a matter of fact, you have to come here to my house to do this podcast.
Well, in fairness, you do have the better setup for podcasting.
Grade school especially, I was friends with the popular kids, but then I never did anything with them because I wanted to do my own thing. I had my own interests, which usually went into a nerdy realm. I know my cousin still gives me crap about how often she heard me yell, "I have the power!" I watched He-Man so much all the time and then really dove into Ninja Turtles. My mom knows more about Ninja Turtles than she would ever care to know because I would never shut up about Ninja Turtles. All that stuff, that became my world. And it helped. It helped with everything. It kept me happy. It always, and continues to keep me happy. It always, no matter what else is going on, it's a place that I can go and be happy.
The Fanboy and the Hater,
where we discuss the best
and worst
in movies,
TV,
and pop culture.
We are available on all major podcast platforms,
including Apple Podcasts, Google Play Music, Stitcher, Spotify, and many more.
Join us while we argue about the things that we love,
like Star Wars, superheroes, and science fiction,
and the things that we wish were better,
like Star Wars, superheroes, and science fiction.
So tune in to The Fanboy and the Hater.